I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, I'm Dr. Gisela Carbonell, curator at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum at Rollins College, and I want to welcome all of you to tonight's program. If you have questions or comments throughout this talk, please submit them through the comment box, and we'll get to them at the end of the talk. So there will be a chance for a conversation. Hi, Isaac, welcome. We are delighted to have with us our speaker tonight, Isaac Gorres, who is a recent Rollins graduate who double majored in biochemistry, molecular biology, and art history with a minor in studio art. Additionally, Isaac was the Fred W. Hicks Curatorial Fellow during his senior year of undergraduate studies at the museum. And as a capstone for his curatorial fellowship, Isaac curated the exhibition that he'll be talking about tonight, titled Path to Paradise, the Artistic Legacy of Dante's Divine Comedy. This exhibition is currently on view at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum at Rollins, and it will continue to be on view until August 29th. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, we encourage you to stop by the museum and enjoy this amazing exhibition. Isaac will begin his graduate studies this fall. He wants to work as an art conservator, and so the next step in his academic development is now to go on and pursue a Master's of Science in Biology with a specialization in microbiology at Radboud University in the Netherlands. So we are delighted to have you, Isaac, and we look forward to hear your talk about Dante and about his artistic legacy and how that shows through in this exhibition that you curated for the museum. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Gisela. So hello, everyone. My name is Isaac Gorres, and it's great to be here back at Rollins. Additionally, thank you so much, Dr. Carbonell, for that wonderful introduction. So today I will be discussing some of the artworks and artists featured in an exhibition that I guest curated at CFAM as the Fred W. Hicks Curatorial Fellow. And the exhibition, as you already know, is entitled Path to Paradise, the Artistic Legacy of Dante's Divine Comedy. And it was staged to commemorate the 700th anniversary of the poet Dante Alighieri's death in 1321. It features illustrated archival texts alongside artworks depicting episodes from the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy, of course, is a monumental epic poem composed of Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And on the right side of the slide, we can see a recent work entitled Porta Ultra Fergola by a 2019 Rollins Studio Art alum who goes by the name of Friday. And although this work was not included in the exhibition, it is an example of inspiration drawn from Dante by a member of our immediate community in Central Florida. And I will discuss some of the other surprising ways that Dante has directly impacted Rollins campus later in the presentation. Additionally, in this presentation, I will discuss elements of potential occult inspiration found in the Dante illustrations of Salvador Dali, attempting to assign them iconographic origin. So let's get started. First, let's start with a lightning speed introduction to Dante for those who are unfamiliar. So Dante Alighieri was an Italian poet, philosopher, and political theorist who was born in Florence in 1265, which was a long time ago. And he is perhaps most famous for writing La Commedia, or the Comedy, which was renamed La Divina Commedia, or the Divine Comedy, after his death. The Divine Comedy was a monumental epic poem consisting of three larger sections, or cantiche. These were Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso once again, and each chronicled Dante's supposed journey through a realm of the Catholic afterlife. In 1283, Dante married Gemma Donati in an arranged marriage, and this was even though he had already professed his love for Beatrice, who died, I believe, when she was like 19 or even younger. So Dante had met this girl in his youth and immediately fell in love with her. And as you'll see it later in the presentation, she's included in the Divine Comedy, as well as some of Dante's other works. So in 1302, while Dante was away from Florence in Rome and or Siena, a faction of Dante's political party, so they were pro-papal, they were pro the Pope, known as the Guelphs, exiled the opposing faction from Florence. And Dante, unfortunately, was in the portion of the Guelphs that were exiled from Florence by the ruling Guelphs. So if Dante were to return to Florence after this event, he would have been burned at the stake for crimes that he did not commit. So thus he was forced to live in exile in Ravenna until his death in 1321. And the Divine Comedy was primarily written and compiled in the decade preceding Dante's death, meaning that it was finished in Ravenna. And Dante is actually still buried in Ravenna today. So here we can see a gallery view of the exhibition text for Path to Paradise in the Zolo Lakeview Gallery of CFAM. This exhibition contains 8 works of art and illustrated texts by a diverse range of artists spanning multiple centuries, from the Italian Quattrocento through the global contemporary. Path to Paradise, the artistic legacy of Dante's Divine Comedy, once again will be open through August 29th, 2021. And I would definitely encourage you guys to come see it in person. Alternatively, however, if you're not able to come in person, all of our exhibitions are available online. So be sure to check that function out as well. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from the exhibition wall text in order to help familiarize you with the exhibition. So in the decade preceding his death, the Florentine poet and polymath Dante Alighieri compiled the Divine Comedy, universally identified as a masterwork of Italian literature. In the narrative epic, Dante recounts his journey through the realms of the Catholic afterlife, describing instances of suffering and salvation he witnessed during his travels. Guided by the Roman poet Virgil, Dante explores hell, purgatory, and finally heaven, where Virgil is replaced by Dante's lost love, Beatrice. With its graphic depictions of eternal punishment and redemption, Dante's Divine Comedy has served as an artistic and moral template for artists, writers, politicians, and religious leaders since its original publication. In its over 700 years of existence, the poem has been illustrated by artists including Sandro Botticelli, Guillaume de Rey, and Salvador Dali. It has been referenced by the likes of John F. Kennedy and Pope Francis. More recently, the poem's first cantica, Inferno, has even been converted into a video game for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 gaming consoles. And surprisingly, as weird as it may sound, you actually can play through Dante's Inferno if you have a PlayStation 3, an Xbox, or an emulator that will allow you to play those systems on a PC. So here we can see the 2010 video game packaging and cover art. And although the game, how should I say this, was an extremely loose adaptation of Dante's Inferno that only followed Dante to the base of Mountain of Purgatory, it still represents an artistic adaptation of Dante. And art historians are increasingly recognizing that digital experiences such as video games are legitimate modes of creative expression that demand academic inquiry. Unfortunately, though, Dante's Inferno was a pretty bad video game that also ran into problems with objectification of female characters and some Orientalist tropes. So hopefully, as more and more video games are created by women, people of color, and individuals belonging to the LGBT plus community, the industry will shift in a more diverse direction. So now I would just like to quickly run through some of the works on display in the exhibition. So if you would like to hear more about any of these works, feel free to ask specific questions in the chat, and I will address them at the end of the presentation, or come back for a more in-depth exhibition tour on Friday, August 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So right on the title wall, displayed in a vitrine, we saw it earlier, is this work. So it's a late 19th century Dante Inkwell. So through my research, I actually attributed this inkwell to an Italian bronze foundry in Naples. And the inkwell was likely created as a souvenir item for early European tourists. So in the label for this object, I talked about how the destruction of Pompeii by Mount Vesuvius, which was very violent and fiery, mirrored some of the visions in Dante's Hell. And Naples is right next to Mount Vesuvius and Pompeii, and I think that could be one of the reasons that this souvenir was created there. So additionally, we have another sculptural work in the exhibition that wasn't inspired by the Divine Comedy because it predates it, but artifacts like it actually inspired some of our illustrators that we'll talk about later. So here we have a Roman sarcophagus from the 2nd century CE depicting the rape and abduction of the Sabine woman. So it's at the end of the Zolo Lakeview Gallery in the exhibition. And the act of sexual violence kind of depicted on the front of the sarcophagus is actually part of the founding mythology of Rome. So in that sense, even though it is a rape scene, it would have served to heroize the person interred inside of the sarcophagus. And before the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, Romans primarily relied on cremation to honor their dead. However, burial would soon surpass cremation with the introduction and popularization of the sarcophagus. And early sarcophagi were either blank or featured a wreath of vegetal matter on their fronts, while later sarcophagus styles evolved to include abstract patterns and images of people either battling or reveling at a party. So depending on the content of the sarcophagus, it's actually relatively easy to date it and say this is the period when this type of sarcophagus would have been most prevalent. And we actually see that. So this work isn't in the exhibition. It's in the British Museum in London. But here we can see the work of Baccio Baldini, an Italian contemporary of Botticelli, who illustrated the Divine Comedy in collaboration with Botticelli around 1481. And in this illustration, Canto 10 of Inferno, we can see that marble sarcophagi served as implements of torture in Dante's Inferno. So much like the marble sarcophagus that we saw on the last slide and in the exhibition, in this image, we can see at least 8 sarcophagi kind of like on fire with people inside. So after entering the city of Dis in the 6th circle of hell, Dante described witnessing the punishment of the Epicureans, or those who believed in life that their souls would die with their physical bodies. The artist depicted at least, once again, 8 unique styles of marble sarcophagi, each inspired by a certain type from antiquity, and further embellished then by the artist's imagination. And although there's no direct connection between the specific sarcophagus that we saw on the last slide and this engraving, it serves as an example of the types of sarcophagi that would have inspired Baldini. And we did actually include an illustration of this engraving on the label for the sarcophagus. Additionally, across from the sarcophagus, we actually have an engraving by Baldini in the exhibition. So it illustrates Inferno 2 when Dante is meeting Virgil, and then they see a vision of Beatrice at the center, telling them, urging them to go through the realms of the afterlife to meet her in heaven. And then towards the upper right, they go through the portal to hell, labeled per me, which means through me in Italian. Additionally, we have 2 works by the Spanish surrealist Salvador Dali in the exhibition, one illustrating Canto 5 of Purgatorio on the left, and the other illustrating Canto 23 of Paradiso on the right. So Dali created a total of 100 illustrations for the Divine Comedy. He was actually commissioned by the Italian government to illustrate an edition of the Divine Comedy that was commemorating the 700th anniversary of Dante's birth. However, that became problematic when Italians pointed out, why isn't there an Italian artist doing it? Dante was an Italian artist, so let's find an Italian artist. So ultimately, Dali had to find another publisher, but he did finish the catalog of prints and publish them under another publisher in 1964. And today, I will discuss how Dali's gender-bending representation of Jerian, so that's a giant from Greek mythology that Dante included in Inferno, and here we can see Salvador Dali's representation of Jerian as a kind of dragon that is carrying Virgil and Dante on his back. But so I'll discuss how Dali's representation of Jerian likely relied on esoteric symbology derived from widely distributed occult imagery of Baphomet, an invented pagan idol commonly associated with Satan. And yeah, so it's like not really that drastic or crazy of an observation to make, but I think specifically the aspects of this image where, for example, Dali added breasts to the figure of Jerian when Jerian is in fact male. So there he's propelling Jerian into the territory of the androgynous, and that demands analysis through this lens. So first, let's establish what Jerian is supposed to look like. So in the circa 6th century BCE Athenian vase, Jerian is depicted on the right being slain by Heracles in one of his labors. So Heracles is on the left here wearing the pelt of the Nemean lion, which he killed as his first labor. And he's attacking the three-headed giant Jerian on the right. So Jerian is the one holding all of the shields. And in Greek mythology, he's described variably as having either 3 heads and 1 body, or 3 interconnected bodies. And obviously, this is different from the illustration that we saw with Dali. But why is this? So indeed, Dante purposefully changed the appearance and descriptions of many mythological creatures in his version of hell, as hell was supposed to be inherently unpredictable. And this was completely intentional. So he would do this and then write about, as Dante the Pilgrim, because he was narrating these visions, he would then write about how he was surprised, how the characters from mythology looked different than what he expected. And here, John Ciardi, a Dante translator and poet, discusses Dante's descriptions of Jerian. Quote, "Some of the details of Dante's Jerian may be drawn from the Book of Revelations, but most of them are almost certainly his own invention. A monster with the general shape of a dragon, but with the tail of a scorpion, hairy arms, a gaudily marked reptilian body, and the face of a just and honest man. The careful reader will note that the gaudily spotted body suggests the leopard, the hairy paws the lion, and the human face represents the essentially human nature of fraud, which thus embodies corruption of the appetite, of the will, and of the intellect." So initially, depictions of Jerian followed Dante's wingless description that Ciardi really summarized really well for us. So as you can see here in 1345, this illuminated manuscript gave Jerian the front paws of a lion and the tails of a scorpion. He almost looks like a leopard seal, kind of. But as you can see, it's wingless and it's male, which both differ from the illustration by Dali. And then here is another example of a wingless male Jerian from circa 1370 in Naples. And then around 1450, Priamo della Quercia added wings to his miniatures of Jerian. And it is unclear why Priamo della Quercia made this addition, but it seems to be the first instance of a Jerian with wings, which is a departure from the text. So I'm not aware of any earlier depictions of a winged Jerian, but it is certainly possible. However, this could be the earliest one extant. And then jumping forward a ways, in 1861, Guillaume de Rey, a French artist, illustrated the Divine Comedy, and he depicted Jerian as a large wyvern-like monster flying with Dante and Virgil on his back. So CFAM has a second edition copy of de Rey's illustrated Inferno in the exhibition, which was graciously loaned by the Rollins Archives and Special Collections at Olin Library. And this is the illustration for the canto featuring Jerian. So looking at these images side by side, this is where we start to see Salvador Dali drawing direct inspiration from de Rey's earlier illustrations. So even though they were created almost a century before Dali's, de Rey's illustrations were clearly referenced by Dali in the creation of his Divine Comedy woodcuts. However, the depictions are not identical and important differences exist. For example, a dramatic rendering of landscape is depicted by de Rey, while Dali really pushes this into the background and minimizes it and focuses on the monster. Additionally, Dali rotated Jerian 180 degrees to face the viewer, and he added female-presenting breasts and horns to the hybrid creature. So, undoubtedly, Dali was familiar with esoteric symbolism and could have conceivably come into contact with this illustration. So the so-called Sabbatic goat of Mendes, the Greek name for a settlement in Egypt, was first drawn by French occult author Eliphas Levi in 1856 and was intended to symbolize the equilibrium of opposites. And Baphomet, which is the invented pagan deity that this figure represents, quickly became associated with Satan and Satanism. So note how Baphomet is pictured by Levi as having female breasts situated above a phallic caduceus. So most depictions of Baphomet after Levi rendered the male deity with breasts. So that after Levi, after 1856, it became kind of like a normal trend in art to make figures or images of the devil appear to be androgynous. And then interestingly, and as a final note, in 1984, Dali designed a deck of limited edition tarot cards. And intriguingly, the card for the devil features a female figure with a horn sprouting from her knee. So much further research is needed to decode the symbols of this tarot deck and elucidate Dali's original inspiration. But both this and Dali's rendering of Jerian as, a kind of androgynous monster underline the possibility that Dali had knowledge of occult symbolism and actively included references to it in his artwork. And I would argue aptly included references to it, especially when you take into consideration the task. He was designing a tarot deck and illustrating Dante's Inferno. So what better way to do that than really lean into occult readings of your works? And I think it was very successful, and we're still talking about it to this day. So, however, more research is really needed to confirm that Dali encountered materials either written by Levi or other authors in the occult. So now I would like to turn to the larger Rollins campus and point out some connections to Dante that might surprise some of you. So first, I would like to point out that a fragment from Dante's tomb in Ravenna is included in the Rollins Walk of Fame, right outside of the new Kathleen W. Rollins Hall. So definitely go check that out if you're near campus. So essentially, it's kind of like on Mills Lawn, and like look at the big building by Mills Lawn, and then it's just to the left of the entrance when you're looking at the building from the front. And additionally, the largest painting in the Path to Paradise exhibition is this one, and it's entitled The Divine Comedy. And it was completed by Tom Peterson, who was a Rollins studio art professor. So it was completed in 2001 while the artist was reading the text. So additionally, this is a new acquisition for CFAM, so we're very happy to have it here. And this has become easily my favorite painting in the exhibition, just because I hadn't seen it until the exhibition opening. So this exhibition was really curated behind the scenes without a lot of direct interaction with the objects, of course, because of COVID. So just seeing it in person and seeing, the surface of it, it has a really interesting like sheen to the way that the oil paint is applied. So I definitely recommend going in person just to see this artwork. And then finally, I would like to revisit Porta Ultra Fergola by Friday, the 2019 Rollins Studio Art alum. So a version of the inscription around the portal in this pigment print, "Abandon all hope, you who enter here," is repeated over the portal to hell in Inferno. And I don't think that a lot of people know that that phrase kind of originated with Dante, but it did. And also, I think it's it's really playful and intriguing how Friday has used the ultra Fergola mirror so that the image of the wavy structure at the center is actually their version of a mirror created by the Italian functional designer Sotsas in 1970. So in that way, it's kind of like a synthesis of multiple different Italian art forms. And I really just like the way that the colors interact with each other. And yes, so also you can purchase, if they're not sold out, you can purchase little stickers of this work on the artist's website. So with that, I would like to take the time to thank the Cornell Fine Arts Museum and its wonderful staff, as well as the Rollins College Archives and Special Collections at Olin Library. Dr. Fred W. Hicks for funding my position, of course. Both Dr. Isela Carbonell, the curator at CFAM, and Dr. Anna Heller, the Bruce A. Beal director of CFAM, for providing their unending support. Professors Zhang and Walton from the library, and Dr. Kimberly Dennis for help translating Italian. So I certainly could not have been able to do any of this without you. Thank you all so much. And with that, I would like to open up the discussion for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac, for that wonderful presentation and for sharing so many insights into the works and also into the process that you engaged in to research and uncover some of the information and the context and background that you shared with us. So we have a couple of questions in the comment section of this stream. Before we go into the questions, I was wondering if you can talk broadly about about the project, because when we started thinking about your capstone exhibition project for the fellowship, you had several ideas that you had proposed, and I just want to share with everyone who's joining us tonight that this was Isaac's theme that he chose, and his proposal is the museum didn't decide the theme. This was generated by Isaac in consultation with, of course, with us. But once you arrived at this theme and you decided that this is what you wanted to research, what was one of the big takeaways from the project? Is there something that surprised you a lot about choosing this particular theme and researching it, or what is that one big thing to take away after this experience?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the largest thing is just that Dante is, of course, a lot of reading, which I wasn't really prepared for. And then also just that, it's a lot to kind of explain, and there's a lot of vocabulary to go over, because not only is this an exhibition of artworks referencing Dante and inspiring certain Dante illustrators, it's also an exhibition about an artwork. The Divine Comedy is a poem, which is an art form. And also, I think it's kind of, as an English speaker who doesn't know much Italian, you're already cut out from a lot of the Divine Comedy, because the Divine Comedy was written in rhyming Italian. So in the Tuscan dialect, terza rima was invented by Dante to kind of piece together long strings of rhyming triplets. So in that sense, it's more difficult to rhyme in English than it is in Italian too. So the translations that I was using to access the Divine Comedy wouldn't always rhyme. So I think that in that sense, some of these artworks can be almost like a window into the mind of Dante, when perhaps it's not even what the artist was intending.
Absolutely, and it makes it a lot more challenging, right, for you as a guest curator to have to deal with all these different layers that you have to navigate in order to get to the substance that you want to work with, and then decide what and how you want to convey to the viewer, to the visitor who's there discovering the exhibition and navigating from work to work and reading the text. Wonderful. So we have a question here from our director, Dr. Anna Heller. She says she's wondering if your research showed that similar Dante Inkwells, referring to the first work that you talked about, were available elsewhere in Italy. The trope of getting inspiration directly from the divine Dante should have been rather irresistible for writers everywhere. Would you say so? And did you find,
yeah, I would totally agree with that. But unfortunately, so we actually don't know where exactly the inkwell in the exhibition came from, but we only found one other inkwell, which is currently in a museum in Australia. And that one, its provenance had assigned it to the foundry of Septimo de Angelis and Sons, which is in Florence. So it is possible that other foundries could have made them, but to my knowledge, only one had really innovated and created the top. But it's a really cool mechanism. Like the top swings open and then the head is just hollow, and you put ink in it where Dante's brain would be. So they were very clever in the late 19th century.
And it's quite an interesting object, and I must say, our team at the museum did a fantastic job displaying it. Right, it's displayed inside a box, and then it has a mirror in the back, and so visitors are able to see, even though it's not displayed in the round, you can see the back of it. It's quite an interesting object, and for something so small, the features in the face, the expression it's quite intense, right?
Yeah, very.
Anna has another question. She says, did you find other references to the occult in Dante's work within or outside the Inferno portfolio?
Well, yes. So for that, I would have to say Dante's entire deck of tarot cards. So there were other tarot cards with even more explicit references to the occult. For example, all of the cards of coins or pentacles include multiple pentagrams on them, which was an established tradition in tarot cards. But the whole tradition of tarot as, like a reading of your future really originated in like the mid to late 18th century. Before then, in Italy and France, it was played as kind of like a suit game, like and it's still played to this day, but how people like, I don't really know the rules of it, but essentially it's just like a game that people play with cards. But so that kind of all like evolved into reading people's futures at the same time that that Levi and other occult authors were publishing on Baphomet and all of the other images. So it kind of like predated this whole satanic panic that happened in the United States, but probably to a lesser extent. So that's why I think it's possible that Dali did encounter certain occult references, but there's definitely also links of other surrealist painters and authors to alchemists and other certain traditions that might be considered esoteric by the rest of us.
Absolutely. And in Dali's case, he was a researcher and seriously studied the traditions that preceded him in art history, in the sciences, in philosophy. So it may very well be that he was well versed with some of these authors and some of the illustrations you showed. There's another question here from Lainey. She says, the tarot deck by Dali is so interesting. Are there any other interesting tidbits from your research into this deck, especially from a queer perspective?
Ooh, good question. Well, I can't think of any off the top of my head, actually, but I will definitely send you any if I encounter them. I know that he does reference a lot of the times like other paintings, or he's very like self-referential in a lot of his works. So even in the card that I showed, it might reference a Dali painting, and Gisela would be better at answering that than me. But yeah, so in certain ways, he could have referenced really any number of works. And although the people who re-editioned the deck at Taschen had a team of art historians come through it, I'm sure that there are still connections that haven't been explored. So yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of symbolism that symbols that appear in that tarot card deck that are very delineant, very easily identifiable. You know, in the one that you showed, particularly the butterfly. Keep in mind that this is a project that he did later in his life, so there are decades of his work behind him, of him working through some of these same some of this iconography that comes up throughout the decades, right, in his work. Excellent. I wonder, Isaac, in this whole process, what surprised you the most? You talked about some of the challenges that you encountered. Was there something that really surprised you in this project?
Yeah, I would have to say, so originally when we included the sarcophagus in the exhibition, originally that was not planned. So we had a list of works and the sarcophagus was not on it. And then Gisela came to me and was like, we're gonna have to put the sarcophagus at the end of the hallway. And at first I was really disappointed, but then I thought, wait, and I brought up Baldini and I saw that Baldini had, you know, illustrated Canto 10 with all of the different types of Roman sarcophagi. And it was really the perfect inclusion. And then I wanted to include it in the exhibition. And also I think that that part of the exhibition in particular really reveals that Baldini was potentially expanding on kind of like a protean form established by Botticelli, because all of Baldini's illustrations were after the drawings of Botticelli, some of which are now lost. So the only surviving drawing by Botticelli of Inferno, Canto 11, features pretty much like blank rectangular prisms for the sarcophagi, and they're not really elaborated at all. So just the fact that Baldini either went on to decorate them and fill them in, or potentially he was copying a more complete version of Canto 10. I mean, it lends him more artistic credence, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that was one aspect of this exhibition and this whole process that really kind of drove the curatorial narrative to a certain extent, at least that portion of it, right? Mm-hmm. Because for those of us who are not familiar with what we're talking about, we had a space limitation and we had a work of art that we needed to figure out how to display it in that particular location because of space, weight, and material limitations. It had to basically be there. And so we had to make a decision as curators, right? To either find a way in which we could incorporate it into the narrative of the exhibition, if at all possible. And if it was not possible, then we needed to make it clear that that object was not part of the show. And Isaac brilliantly researched that and found a legitimate and very important substantial connection with the theme of the exhibition. So it was kind of unexpected on my part. It was unexpected on Isaac's part. And it worked beautifully to tie all these objects together. And I agree with you 100%, Isaac, that the inclusion of this object provides even more depth to the telling of the story and the exploration of Dante's artistic legacy in this exhibition.
Definitely.
And one other thing that I wanted to say is that if you haven't seen the show, when you go see it, you'll notice that the most recent work is from 2010, the Tom Peterson painting, 2001. 2001. So you have contemporary interpretations of Dante and contemporary imaginings of Dante, using very modern contemporary vocabulary and colors, etc., going all the way back to ancient times with that sarcophagus. So really in a very small number of objects, you have a wide range of explorations into this particular theme. Any other questions or comments? And then we have the books. The books, can you talk a little bit about the books from these rare books that we have, the illustrated books that we have that are from the archives and special collections from Olin Library?
Sure, yeah. So we have one illustrated by Guillaume de Rey, which I kind of talked about a little. So that was the image of Jerian that Dali was inspired by directly. And that one, I think, was published or republished as the second edition, so in 1875. And then also we have, I think, an earlier second edition by Michelangelo Cittani, and that was really trying to map out because geographers and like literary scholars back then used to argue over the exact, mechanics of how Dante's hell and purgatory and paradise were laid out, and they would actually have ongoing arguments about the geometries of Dante's afterlife. So there's also, right now, it's opened to the ordering of purgatory. So it's kind of a schematic of the Mountain of Purgatory. But unfortunately, I don't have an image of that on me right now. But Gisela and I were talking about that in the print study room and looking at it, and it really made sense why it was adapted into a video game, because you could just see the different levels, and it just made sense. So I definitely I really enjoyed working with the Rollins College Archives and Special Collections.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that these are only two of the books that they have that we have at Olin Library in the special collections and archives that address Dante's and in Dantes Inferno. There were several others, and we had to pare it down, right, and pick the ones that best illustrated the point that Isaac wanted to make in the exhibition. There were these very small pocket editions of Dante that didn't have any illustrations, so we decided not to include them, but which are from late 19th century, I believe, early 20th century, and those are part of the collection too. So just interesting to see the rich variety in which Dante manifests in art and culture. Right? Is there anything else that you want to share with us, Isaac, before we wrap up today's program?
No, but just thank you guys, and thank you for the platform to share my research and for allowing me to do this exhibition, which I really had a fun time, and I really enjoyed it, and it was a great professional development opportunity. So
well, it's a fantastic project, so congratulations again. For all of you who join us tonight, thank you again for joining us in this space. We have several other events happening the rest of, and then we will see you in the galleries, hopefully this fall, with more tours and artist talks in person. In the meantime, you can visit us at rollins.edu/CFAM. Visit our exhibition pages and scroll down for the virtual 360 tour of this exhibition and all the other exhibitions that are on view right now. This season will be up until August 29th, and then we'll close for a little bit to change out and install our new exhibitions for the fall. So we hope to see you in our social media pages and our websites, and of course in our galleries. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Take